Welcome back to the A-List. My name is Brandon Chapman. I'm a financial advisor in Vancouver, BC. Today we're joined by someone who really has shaped the financial services industry in Canada over the last 3 decades, and I've had the great pleasure of knowing since I joined the industry. From her early days at London Life to her leadership with Canada Life and Freedom 55 Financial, she's built an incredible presence in the greater Vancouver area and across Canada, and really someone I've known to be very authentic, caring, and ultimately a community builder. Hence why I wanted to welcome her today. So Izumi, thank you for being here with us.
Oh, Brandon, thank you for having me here today. It's a real privilege, but more importantly, it is a real pleasure to be sitting across from you, somebody who I've seen grow from a little tiny chicken to a diet. Well, hen's probably not the appropriate word, but somebody who has created so much good in the community, and this would be an example. So it really is my pleasure to be here.
Well, they say you stand on the shoulders of giants, and so Izumi is one of those giants that I've had the pleasure of being a part of her community. And today I'm hoping to just glean some of that insight to share with clients, friends, and colleagues who are leaders or aspiring to be leaders in their respective communities. So first of all, Izumi, you're in probably one of the most male-dominated industries here in Canada, which is financial services. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious how that shaped your first few years in the industry, and if that played a role in your success at all, and if not, why?
You know, that's a really good question, and I thought you would ask me that one, so I pondered it because honestly, it's very complicated for me. So I think the simplest way to define it, and I just mentioned this last week in something that I was sharing with people, that for sure it is a male-dominated industry. It very much so was when I began. So for example, there was even no maternity leave policy when my daughter was born. But there's something that I always say to myself, and it's just a little bit of a joke. It's a Monty Python skit. I don't know if you've ever seen The Four Yorkshiremen, and I don't even know if that's appropriate to share anymore. But it's just about how life, if you think you had it bad, somebody else thought they had it bad. And I never honestly thought there was anything happening. So I always feel a little bit apologetic when I think about it, because I know there's lots of women that are listening to this that are thinking, is there a pathway through? But honestly, I have been a very blunt instrument to my shame, and I think what has defined me though is that I was born the year of the fire horse. So something completely out there in the Chinese astrological calendar, but it is I don't know if you know the story of what a fire horse is, but it's really the daughter that you dread. You try to avoid that year of pregnancy because you don't want your daughter to be born the year of the fire horse, because they're stubborn, they're fierce, they're difficult. And so I actually think that I didn't notice. I just love that there was no bathroom lineups. It's the little things in life, right? So, I half jest, but at the end of the day, I knew that you would probably ask this. So I tried to think of something that would be helpful and constructive to the audience. And what I realized is that it did shape me coming into an industry that was male-dominated, because the reason why I can have this banter is because I was surrounded by individuals and leaders probably my whole life, through music, through my fierce summer job. I always worked 2 full-time jobs in the summer. I worked almost full-time in university at the Pit Pub as a head bar. But every one of the people that I worked with, I believe that they cherished me for who I was and my unique abilities, and gender was never put on there. I was, typically in male-dominated environments, but most of them were performance-based. They were meritocracies, and this business was no different. So was it me? I don't think so. Yes, I was blunt and I was a fire horse and just didn't notice a lot of things. But what I do believe is I've been surrounded by extraordinary people who have cultivated and created space for me to be able to give that unique piece. And they would often say it's a very eccentric piece. So, as an example, if you came into the bar, student pub, very heavy drinking at that time, back in my day, and my big thing was that if you came on and you worked a night that I was head bar, we would be done when the bar closed 30 minutes later. So in my experience working as a young bartender in the Pit Pub, in the beginning, we'd end up, being there till 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. So when it was my head bar shift, and that's probably where I learned some of the really key takeaways, ironically, about leadership, and that leading by example, it's about removing barriers to success. I probably spent my whole time as a head bar doing little bits of everybody's job so that they could do what they did best. So if a waiter was really great in the floor, I would bus, and then people, would say, they're not bussing, how come they get to do that? But I would say, you know what, they're doing really great at what they do. I have time, I'm going to do this. I would do garbage. I would shut down the zoms, clean them. So if you're ordering a beer 15 minutes before close, you would have to suffer the indignity of probably being sprayed a little bit by water. But I had leaders who just went, oh, that's Izumi. It was a benefit to them because everybody knew at 1:30 we'd sit and have a beer and everything was done. And everybody's a volunteer there. Everybody was, they were working, but they went on to be lawyers, doctors, all kinds of things. So it's not like you could necessarily build culture. You had to build culture in a hot pot very quickly, but it had to have the flavor, the depth, the piece that you wanted a shift to go really well. And really it was about the experience. How do you make it so that everybody has fun? And that includes the people you work with. So that carried on into this career in that I had a tremendous leader who once again cherished my eccentricities. So when he was, I went through my 42 interviews. Probably they were vetting very carefully, as they should. And what he said was, for example, do you have a car? So back then, everybody did appointments in people's homes. It made perfect sense. And not having really a filter and not knowing, when he said that, it was a very innocent question. I said, I hate driving. What is this? Are we like taxi drivers? I thought it was a profession, that we were helping people with money. And he, without missing a beat, he goes, I hate driving too. And that was it. And then the next weekend, when I started, I just said, I'm going to do all my appointments in my office, which once again wasn't heard of. I wasn't trying to reinvent or be innovative. It just never occurred to me. I didn't understand, I didn't like driving, number one, but why wouldn't we do all the appointments in the office? So I just said, can I decorate? And so you have this wonderful, beautiful space and you know what it's like to sign your covenant for your lease. I said to them, is it okay if I just decorate a bit? They came in the next, over the course of the weekend, and I had painted my broom closet. Actually, it was a broom closet. I think they just shoved, it was the only space available. I painted it burgundy. It was small, so I put tile mirror up one side. I feel badly. They did not get their damage deposit back. But Mark, once again, never said, oh, why did you do that? He just went, oh, I that's okay. And so it might seem like I was indulged, but really it was not. They just appreciated initiative. And I think that they understood that in order to create a diverse space where there was lots of different people giving advice, that wouldn't have been their motivation at the time, me being female. I was the right person for the role because I really wanted to run and own my own business.
So sorry, Izumi, what role did you start and then how did that evolve?
Financial advisor. My apologies. Yeah. I was hired out of university.
And where was that?
It was in Vancouver, and what you would know, Brandon, is Vancouver, Georgia, the original Vancouver, Georgia. And I was next door to one of your colleagues, Kirk Wakefield. He was my person who was that steady, and you know him as a human. So if you multiply him by everybody that was there, sure, I was surrounded by men, boys, however you define it, but they were all supported. We were all doing our own thing. And I think what it was whether deliberately or not, everybody created the space where I could be authentically me. And, if you're productive, you accomplish it, you make a difference, you earn the right to keep moving in that way, with thought, with guidance. But I am so grateful to have found the people that I found so early in life who taught me all the way through, whether it was Mark or whether it was the Pit Pub, whether it was... Which
Mark is this, right?
Mark Neal.
Mark Neal.
So, yeah. And he was iconic in industry as well. But I think he listened, he cared, and he never judged. He was always there to guide, good guide rails. We're running a business. There's a purpose and an end point, and there's process. But he really did. It was my business, so he allowed me to own it. And that was even at a time when we didn't really own our own business, if I had read the fine print. So once again, a little bit of a blunt instrument, but sometimes that's helpful.
Certainly. And it's interesting, you're your experience, because you touched on a few things there. You touched first based on the leaders that you were able to be connected with early on in a male-dominated industry. I have noticed in this industry there are interesting personalities, obviously some boisterous ones, maybe some ego. However, your leadership style, as I've seen it, has been you're almost like a transistor between corporate requirements and then on the ground realities. And you do a really fantastic job of translating what are corporate decisions, but making them more reasonable so that folks under your care feel like they're under your care and they're not being directed from like a corporate entity. So how did you manage some of the egos that may have existed in our industry as you rose up as a leader? And how do you turn sort of corporate decisions into, I would say, a more real office experience among cordial friends?
That's a really good question. If I was to find one of the roles of a leader, and once again, there are many great leaders out there, and I was actually in their story path. But what I learned from them was that as a leader, you set the narrative. Everybody needs to accomplish anything. It is not mutually exclusive what corporately needs to be accomplished and what might have been what I was responsible for in terms of creating results. But at the end of the day, my job was to remove barriers to success and to, amplify the compelling part of the message to move it forward. There's a very fine line too. Like I find that, if one was cynical, they could say it was spin. Spin doesn't work, right? Spin is very shallow. It lives on the surface. It dies. What it was to take the time, and it did. I've been through many iterations of the organization. We zig and we zag, but what I've always understood as a fundamental truth, and it was set deep inside me in the very beginning of my career, is certainly in our industry, clients really are at the center of everything. So despite how things can radically change, and leaders always change. We live in a culture too right now where it's return to shareholders. We hear that all the time, but once again, if you're a product or service industry, the client is at the center of everything. And so I do think that I'll talk about my team in particular. My job was to keep them safe, to get us to where we're going to. We always wanted to see the advisors we worked with be extremely successful, to innovate in the industry, to make a difference. That never changed through every single iteration. And somebody, could they say to me, well, that's not actually profitable? Like nobody really could. So it was always a little bit of a dance. But my job was to always say, okay, what is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? Who is the most important person? To put the covenant, the values covenant around how we'll operate, and to be relentless in that strategic, practical, tactical piece to give them the safe space to be in, to keep things fun, because sometimes my team, they would get messages like, and I totally appreciate that it's about, sometimes decisions are made, they're about efficiency, not about effectiveness. Effectiveness is the long-term vision. We were all on the same page organizationally and micro-organizationally, but it gets a little bit messy because there's a lot of people turn over. But I think I can say, and that's thanks to the leaders that I had even internally, they gave me the autonomy to stay. I'd have to, with each change, revisit and step back. And I'm pretty sure in the last evolution, last 2 evolutions ago, we brought on some new team members. So I had the pleasure of really, growing up with, it was family around me. It was people that we brought into the business. We did all succession internally. It's not that we weren't open to not external. That wasn't the point. It's just, there were people that were talented and they were the right fit and they understood the culture, because culture is absolutely everything. And culture is community. And community, as we know, when it becomes big enough, becomes a movement, and that changes the world. So that's the macro. But the micro, I think, is just really understanding my role was to help them to be successful and be respectful, but to really shape the story and say, things are never as they seem either. There's a reason for everything. So to spend a lot of time on the why, and then to understand, which I think is really important. It's been a theme that's resonated. we all know the importance of the why, but that, once again can switch. That can be different than vision. Why is a deeply personal thing. And then if you have alignment with your team, that makes a huge difference. That would be your values covenant. But it was to always say, why not? Like, let's be on the cutting edge. Let's be, difficult but respectful. And difficult, what I mean is just innovative. And somebody like you, you're very, I admire you. You're an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. And that is how all great change in the world happens. Something, the flat earth theory was not very popular. It's come back into popularity. So that's a very exciting thing. Maybe people weren't wrong, but it's, I do think you have to stay steady and help your team to stay steady and make sure the messaging is clear and keep them safe, which Simon Sinek says. But it is so true. When people are safe, they will, their true potential becomes unleashed.
For sure. And you've been clearly someone that's led with that intention throughout your career. And there's a few threads I want to pull on there, Izumi. One, you spoke about efficiency versus effectiveness. And I think a lot of leaders can take something away from that, because oftentimes companies will think in quarters, but leaders will think in decades with the relationship deposits that they make with their team and perhaps their colleagues. You've clearly been someone that has made many of relationship deposits over the years with the people that you've worked with or have been associated with you, and that's why you have such a community. Like when I attended your retirement party and the room was packed, absolutely packed, no room for anyone to walk almost. Like that, it says so much, a testament to yourself. And I think it was meant to be a small party. When people heard, oh man, Izumi's retiring, people show up for you. So you have been known to say that privilege comes with responsibility. And how would you say that mantra has played out in your career, in particular how you lead with your team members and then of course the advisors that they have supported?
Yeah, privilege. I mean, I didn't mean to take that from Spider-Man, but it's a very good, I think, tenet to live by, mainly because on a very simple level, we live in Canada. It is not perfect, but my goodness, and this is not everybody, obviously, but certainly if you wake up, you have shelter over your head, and you have a meal, and you are supported, you have people that love you, it behooves you not to recognize the position of strength and privilege that you are at relative to the majority of the world in different places and spaces at different times, and to really exert yourself and take advantage of that extra bandwidth that you have that's not about survival, and to take that and make a difference on behalf of others.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to be able to sit down and have this conversation and talk about something as perhaps abstract as leadership. But I do think in a world where everything is hyper sensationalized online, people are looking for authentic leaders who care and who care about their success. So you've been that in my life and many others in sort of the financial advisor community.
Yeah.
But now as you're through all these rebrands and changes, how has your, I guess, upbringing before you got into the industry influenced the type of leader that you became? And are there some people that you would like to attribute some of who Izumi is today that you can share?
There is, when we talk about this industry, I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. We're not going to go back in time, that far back, because I'd be very far back in time.
I would be curious, but whatever you're comfortable sharing.
I think it began with my parents, and it surprises me because I was, my mother and father, like all parents, opposites attract. They're very different people. My mom, she has a certain intensity to her. I actually didn't read the room properly. So once again, sometimes it's good. I appreciate that we have access to all kinds of information. But it's important to access experiences, not information. It's important to access insight, not just information. And so, that's been a tenet. If you ask me a little bit about mentoring and those pieces, I'll talk to that. But somebody in our neighborhood got a piano. I was 9 years old, so very late, too late to be a Suzuki wonder child. It never occurred to me that my mom did music. She was a concert mistress of the Nine Symphony for 25 years. She went to UCLA for music. I should have known she was fierce. She received the American Field Scholarship to attend university in the U.S. post-war, and she was a female. There was many different things. There's many pieces to that story that tell a lot about who she is. So very innocently, my dad's very laid back. He grew up primarily in an internment camp in Greenwood. I'm third generation Japanese. My great-grandfather immigrated here in 1908. So my dad didn't grow up really with music or fluffy, what he would call fluffy fancy, but he loved music and he loved to fall asleep to it. That was probably the extent of his music, but he was always very supportive. But he was a biologist, a salmon biologist, so he spent a lot of time away. So my mother was the primary caregiver for many years as my dad was working in that field where they'd be up in Babine Lake and, for months at a time and then come home. My mom, I just said, I'd really like to play piano, but all I really liked was the mechanics, right? You press a key. I didn't, like somebody had a piano, I just wanted one. I guess it'd be the equivalent of somebody saying, oh, somebody has a Nintendo, I'd like that Nintendo, right? If people even play Nintendo now. And she just said, sure, as long as you practice. And I went, sure. Yeah, of course, right? I didn't know that was 2 hours a day. Nobody gave me the memo. Made sense. She was a musician. My sister is actually a professional musician. Never occurred to me, but she never said you need to do a musical instrument, you need to do this or that. She never exerted her will, but I chose that. And then there was a deal that said that when you get your ARCT, you can quit. So my whole life was a run. I loved performing. I just did not like practicing. And I think the difference between a musician, like a true musician like my sister, she likes performing, but she loves practicing. Like I was a terrible kid. I hope my mom's not listening, but I would literally, press a recording of me playing when they were gardening, and then I would sit on the couch, read a magazine, and I would play so they would hear me practicing. Like I call that my innovative state. Doesn't say much for my integrity as a child, but I love to perform. So the bottom line is you had to practice. So that would just be like a little 15-minute distraction if there was an opportunity. But the one thing that my parents made a deal with me, and it was mostly my mom, she said, you have to practice 2 hours a day. But if you get that done, then you're done for the day. So what I would do later on in my teen years, and I was practicing 5 hours before a competition, but the 2 hours I could manage. So on a Thursday night, I would practice from 6 to 8 o'clock, which makes sense. And then I would get up at 12 and practice till 2. And if I was a parent, I don't think I would be very happy that the piano's clanking. They never said anything. They never complained. That was my practicing for the Friday, and then I would go out all night, right? Because I'd practice for the next day, because it's a bit of a barrier when you have to come home from school. You can't hang out with your friends.
So how old were you here, Izumi?
There I'd probably be about 15, 16.
Okay.
But my parents, they always honored what they said. They did what they said. I don't know if it was even that conscious for them. Maybe they just never even heard me practice. I don't know. But I look back and it reminds me of that piece of deliver on your promises, right? Like it's very important. Sometimes it's difficult, but that is the most important thing, because that is brand, that is consistency. And certainly in leadership, it is the most important thing, because people can know how they can count on you. And then further around that, you learn to operationalize it and to put processes and systems in place so that once again, the baseline, the table stakes things are taken care of, so you can actually focus on the people, the relationships, and delivering on your promises. So that was very beginning. I learned that a word was a word, and that's kind of, what Mark said. You can paint your office. He never came in and said, what did you do, right? Not at all. Nothing. As a matter of fact, at my retirement party, I think he talked about that, and he was just smiling. He just thought it was funny. And, I think that funniness, that humor too, when people are in a safe place, you can find humor even when there's danger or challenge. And if you're together because you've cultivated like-minded people, they're headed in the same direction, and as a leader, you keep the compass safe and you find out ways to, to see everybody's unique fit. At that time, when you asked me about, that leader who might have cultivated something a little bit different, back then we would call it, I think, diversity, but it was not, I know it was not intentional, what he was doing was just finding people. Mark was looking for people that were entrepreneurial, that wanted to make a difference, that were passionate, right? We always talk about his sparkle. And I was very blessed that he saw that in me. I didn't have a pedigree that looked like, I didn't graduate in commerce, which, was, in my mind, it was an Achilles. It was a barrier. Really, it turns out now it doesn't, it's about the learning, your ability to manage deductive reasoning.
What did you study, Izumi?
English literature.
English lit, okay. Cool.
Yeah. But, in the end, life is about communication, so that was really great. But that was a very long-winded way around your question. But I think that I did learn, and Mark would have been in those people, and Noel, who has lived a life unimagined. He was an individual before...
For the audience, Noel...
Noel Villard was the regional director at the time I started. And Mark and Noel, they both qualified for the Ironman together. That was their team building exercise. So you can kind of read in a little bit to, their discipline, their drive, their goal, the business side of it, the accountability. But as humans, they were extraordinary. And so Noel, when he... I guess this was many years in, and the organization sent him to counseling, but they would not. He was so productive that they were trying to help to understand him, because he would be up at 4:00 in the morning calling head office, leaving messages, because he was very much an early bird, went to bed early, but he was so passionate about what he did, so passionate that he actually moved up to Whistler. So this was before we had flexible days. He was the regional director of a very traditional office, but he worked in the office Monday through Thursday, and on Friday through to Sunday, that was family time for him. But nobody worked as hard as Noel, and anybody around us, we all knew that, we wanted Noel to be up there. We worked the Dan Sullivan, the focus days. We put in another process, Wayne Cotton, that talked about how to manage focus. They built the processes and systems around life, around life balance. We didn't realize it at the time. I didn't even know it, but I've lived in that legacy of just, not one thing is more important than the other. They're all important. So how do you have the bandwidth to optimize all those pieces? It requires planning, but it also requires a steady hand, because I don't know anybody at that time that would say, I work a 4-day week when they work for an organization.
Yeah, and I think, Izumi, you've been known to builds good processes, but then have flexibility in order to support those in your care. I think back to the Georgia office, where when clients would first walk in, there was Naj there at the front offering a beverage, and then clients come into the nice boardroom. And that experience, I think, taught me a few things early days about the importance of the client experience from the moment they first connect with you. But let's switch gears a bit and talk a little bit about mentorship.
Okay.
So you have been a mentor to so many, not only in our industry, but some students as well. What's something that you wish you knew before you started mentoring others?
It wasn't something that was, death-defying. It's what we all intuitively know, depending on how you were brought up. But the key importance of language, words matter. It's about building trust, relationships. That's all life is. Life is communication, right? And I was reminded yesterday by a mentee who is now incredibly successful. So I'm always, I'm humbled whenever he calls me and says, it's time for us to meet. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I should be calling you. Wait, I'm afraid to call you because you're so successful. But I mentioned that I was going to be chatting with you today, and I said, I'm just curious, is there something? And very early on in my relationship, he was referred to me by somebody else who just said, can you meet with him? He doesn't know a lot of people. He's an international student, and he's great. And, this individual is very special. And I just, at the very beginning, I just gave him a book as a gift. It was How to Win Friends and Influence People, which doesn't sound, it sounds a little Machiavellian when you think of it today, but it's Dale Carnegie just talking about people. And so he said to me, Izumi, in university, I took commerce. We never, ever got anything like that. The importance of SOC facts, the importance of being human. It's that connectivity, that touch point that is so critical to all success, all opportunity, all fulfillment. And, it wasn't the book, but it was the idea that, I was coming to see you, and really what we focused on was not anything, what I thought at the time was tactical or practical. It was more about human connection. But that was the thing that I wish was cultivated more in university. And I think of myself, would I have gotten even further if somebody had given me that? I think some things have to be learned, right? And then you own them and they're exciting. But I do wish that was hard baked into the curriculum.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the soft skills and what people learn outside the classroom has perhaps been more important than what they learn in the classroom. I've got a few interns that work here with us, and the things I try to stress is the relationships that they build and the things that they do in the work is far more important than perhaps maybe the grades, unless of course you want to become a doctor or post-grad, etc. Because if you know how to have good conversations with people, care about people, and you can build authentic relationships, that can compound over the many years in which obviously we've seen that in your career.
I mean, there's one thing I'm just going to add in there that I believe there are a couple of universities. I believe UBC is one of them. So when I retired, a thought went through my head, should I brush up my chemistry and go be a doctor? But one of the things they're beginning to value is that obviously grades are important. Like, you need them. But there has been a movement to really, particularly in med schools, from my understanding, this was a couple of years ago, because I was very excited thinking, here's an opportunity for me. But it was about what they're looking for people with experience. Because once again, medicine is, you need to know your science perfectly, but at the same time, if it has no human connection, it's just applied research on humans. And, we know the efficacy of most treatments. A big part of it is something that we can't really tell. It's how dopamine, serotonin, all those things they run. And a good doctor who is reassuring, those are the happy stories that people actually have really positive recoveries, or even when they don't, they're given thoughtful pause. It's the kindness, right? That's the...
Well, and you've led with kindness throughout your career, right? People will forget what you said, but they won't forget how you made them feel. And I think most people who have interacted with you over the years have felt that Izumi cares and she's thoughtful, and you have that emotional intelligence with every interaction that you have. And that, I think, is something that most people who are listening could really apply to their own leadership capability. Now, you have been mentoring students from BCIT as well as UBC for decades. What are some things that you've learned from your mentees over the years?
I've learned so much. Like it's extraordinary, particularly when people have very fresh minds. So maybe I should have used a better euphemism, was I had a fresh mind versus I was a blunt instrument. But it's to be open to the world, right? And today, through the internet, through travel, through ability to experience many different things, if somebody has that heart, and I've had some extraordinary mentees, and what has made them all that way is that they're courageous, they're passionate, and they move quickly through the world. They're very agile, so it's almost like it allows me to sit, because they bring so much to me through their experiences, even though their timeline is short. And all I really do is I have the opportunity to be introspective and frame and help them to be able to translate that experience into something tangible that's like on a rock climbing wall. It's your next hold.
Totally. Yeah. Like I think of, on my side, Eileen coming into the industry, she was able to get some support from Greg Taylor and John Panago before she eventually joined our firm, and being able to have that ground level set after having her experience with Advisor Flow really helped put her in a really good place. But even now, she sees things from a different perspective. So when we're working on a joint client, I'm teaching her things and she's teaching me, but ultimately we get to a better outcome, provided that both sides are, I think, open-minded and respectful.
Yep. I think everything really is. It's a collaboration, right? I mean, it's bringing the best to yourself. I always said too that, the goal is to get to the caramel secret. Everybody has a caramel secret, a super skill. And so, throughout my lifetime, even though I might know somebody for years and years and years, I'm always digging, I'm always curious, because once again, you've heard me say this a million times, it's not original, but it's the books you read and the people you meet. And so it's interesting that I find that students on the surface, when you meet them, they're so open to the world that their caramel secret it tends to float on the surface. I think we begin to protect it over time, but everybody has a thing, and if they know what that is, and if they can identify it quickly, it is a life of fulfillment, because it's more a matter of being creative and having the courage of your convictions to really pursue that special thing and find that place, that home, so that you can make your ultimate contribution. And students do that. The other thing about the mentoring, and the reason why it's so important, was to be able to bring that back to my team. So something like the BCIT program, that was very innovative when Larry Stubbs began that program at BCIT, and I was very lucky that he asked, would you be one of those mentors that comes? It was a very time intensive, but only because it was care intensive from my perspective. But I was able to engage the rest of my team. But what that allowed us to do, once again, it's the ambient collateral benefit of giving. You always get back more. It allowed us to benchmark our processes and systems and our financial planning standard, because the students would present and there'd be other firms there. So we could always know. It's one thing to develop your training in isolation, but how do you know? You don't want to experiment. So that was, not only was it giving back, it was leading by example. It was engaging and creating fulfillment, because once again, in my team, it's the caramel secret. We had people with very unique talents that if they were hired for their role, what they did once they were on the team didn't meet the job description. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very important. So as a result, you have to have lots of different projects and things that are all tied to the same epicenter, but allow people to show different parts of their talent, their care. And so it was a win-win on so many levels. But for me personally, I have learned so much from my mentees, and coming into retirement, like making that decision to cross over, what I've realized is that you never lose relationships, and as long as you're curious, I'm always worried that my brain, like, I'm going to stale date, and eventually I won't have a question to ask. But now I'm convinced that when I think I know someone, it just means their caramel secret is really, really deep, and I have to, I'm curious. I want to find it, because I want to find out. I want to figure out how I can connect with it and maybe connect others, because how powerful to link all of those things together. That makes, as you know, better community, better world. That is world peace in its perfect form.
Beautiful. Yeah, that caramel secret, it's really figuring out what drives people, what gives them that spark, that passion, and how do you bring that out to elevate the experience for everyone with the organization or project or task that you're collectively working on. Now, for some of our perhaps younger listeners who perhaps are just getting started on their leadership journey, what advice would you have for them in order to perhaps set them off on the right foot?
Well, I guess two things. Number one, reach out. I know that people are always, it's about confidence, right? And I think that everybody you should have the confidence that you are you, right? And it's Dr. Seuss, those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. Every single person that I know that is successful, they were helped by somebody. They know that they need to ask for help. They know that they need to receive help graciously, and they know that they need to give help. So a lot of times I find that, when people are younger, they can get awestruck by people. But I always say to them that, in my experience, the most successful, the people that I think are the scariest, they actually are the kindest, the easiest, and the first ones to take a coffee, because they remember, right? So, and that is, communication is 85% visual. So once again, if your person that you're reaching out to is halfway around the world, of course, I love that technology makes that easy. But if it's at all possible, it even says something about you. Your mentor is in Mexico City. You actually fly down and sit outside their door for 5 hours. They will remember you for the rest of your life. I heard a really interesting story about somebody who was getting they were getting a fellowship, and so they reached out to the person that was creating the body of work and said, hey, I think that this might be happening, but will you mentor me for the next 2 years? Big ask for the CEO of a company. And surprisingly, the person said, yes, I'd be delighted. Well, to the person's chagrin that had asked, they didn't actually receive the fellowship from the foundation. And they called rather sheepishly and said, I'm really sorry. And right away, without skipping a beat, that CEO said, well, that's unfortunate, but that's okay. We'll still do this. So I think it's to remember that good people are good people, and to never be afraid, because that's how you're going to learn and grow. That's how you connect. It's not about, you hear about you need to network. Yes, you do, but that you need to connect with people, right? It's very important. I say that to my daughter all the time. I force her to connect. She's a natural connector, but even, she just said to me the other day, because I was introducing her to somebody that really I just liked, that had been introduced to me by somebody else because people know they can refer me to people, and I will just meet them to just learn. And inevitably, there is some piece of connectivity there that I can reach into that is helpful to somebody else. So if nothing else, I want to have that, want to have that in my compendium. She said, well, Mom, it's easy for you to do that. And my daughter is a very accomplished individual. And I just went, what are you talking about? People, they love you when they meet you. They're connected. She goes, no, you do this or that. I said, no, I just ask, and I have an open heart, and I sit. It's not what somebody can give you. It's what you can learn from them, that in order to move forward, if you want to build any kind of business, and I would suggest life is a business, family, building a family, a good, not building a good family, building a family is a business. Building a volunteer life is a business. Faith is an enterprise, right? It's a journey. They're all journeys. You need good people around you. So reach out. I think is one of the most important pieces.
Yeah, the tenacity to actually reach out and push for more, right? Like, it's easy to sit in a place and wait for tasks to come to you, but if you can find someone who you think you can learn from, ask. And if you ask, a lot of people are very willing to share wisdom and time with those that are respectful and are doing things for the purposes of relationship building. So that, I guess my follow-on question to that, Izumi, for you would be, what would you say is the difference between networking and relationship building?
I think networking is just a way to put a tactical layer on it. So maybe you can look at it from a business analytics level, right? Quantitatively and quantitatively, like you would do anything, analyze it to see how you can do better. But it is about connection. It is about relationship. Just like I know that a lot of times people say, I want to do marketing, I don't want to do sales, right? And, I always say, I don't, people can, whatever makes them comfortable, but I always found that distinction a little interesting, because people's biases inherently are in that word, and it affects them. The language affects them. But I think if you just step back and you look at it, we are all in the business of sales, which is effective communication to help people to make good decisions for themselves, to support them, to be a good friend, and to help them to find their success, regardless of, what your relationship might be with them. And then I think when we talk about networking, I think that's the scientific methodology around it. It's there's quantitative data that's attached to it. But the bottom line is really, it's about connecting, and everybody has the ability to connect. So I think when we call it networking, it becomes scary for people, particularly if you're younger and you've never done networking. It's like, I have to go to a networking event. But, my simple advice is just, stand up, dress up, show up, and then stand up. Be your authentic self, and like Velcro. I use this analogy before in leadership, but in life, you want to be like Velcro with lots of sticky pieces. And it's true, when you leave Velcro out, all of a sudden there's dog hair, there's lint, dust bunnies, all kinds of things are on there. But the bottom line is you become something that people can stick to, because it's real. It's a handhold that's solid, and they know you, and that's safety, because it's consistency. It all ties together. So when you go out there and you're worried. There's nothing to worry about. You are you. You know you better than anybody else. And networking is just about, is about connecting. And that's it.
It's interesting. I like the Velcro analogy. My wife, Dawn, she talks about you get more bees with honey. And I think you're definitely someone that probably follows that same mantra, in that in a leadership role, the better you treat those in your care, the more likely they are to want to proactively do things as opposed to being told to do things by their boss. So I think that difference between boss and leader is so crucial, particularly for younger people who perhaps haven't had those leadership opportunities yet. When you meet young people and when you're mentoring them, what are some of the, I guess, problems that they've seen in their leadership experiences that perhaps they've shared with you? And then how has that shaped some of the ways that you lead within your community?
Perspective is everything, right? So it's hard to know. There's 2 sides, there's 10 sides, there's 50 sides. So I think one of the things as a leader that one must be mindful of in my own lesson to myself is to always be self-reflective, which allows you to be self-regulated and self-disciplined and mostly self-aware. And that includes checks and feedback. So you want to make sure that you're not just, I'm not suggesting that anybody imagines, but there's a law of attraction. What you think will likely happen, especially if you are a talented person. So you really need to have that self-awareness. And I think the world is what you make of it. So it's true, you might be just like a tiny garden, if the garden is worthy, in a field of nothingness, and you're those little flowers. But if you've ever seen a forest grow after a fire, it's incredible, right? And even though we mourn the loss of the big, beautiful trees, all of a sudden life that we could never have imagined comes. Flowers that haven't been there for 2,000 years all of a sudden come out. Something we would think is an invasive species, all of a sudden we cherish. Our perspective moves. So I always say, and this is not very popular because everybody wants to be comfortable. They want to be happy. But there's a saying, and it's like the Monty Python skit, I relish the harsh conditions. And I know that with that comes humor. So, the worse it is, the more I go, I'm determined to because you're going to get through everything. Because once again, we live in a world where the final outcome, if you're loved, you're probably still going home on Friday saying, I had a really tough week. And then somebody says, okay, we'll sit down and have dinner, right? Like, we don't fall very far. So therefore we need to do research. We need to be self-aware when we make that. Now, what you need to do is to control what you can control, because that's all you can do. And it's an interesting question you asked me. It was the second part of the answer that I just rambled there on. The past New Year's, I did something, and it'll be a tradition. So we just actually sent out our new note to the Tiki Cats, it's a group of very successful 26-year-olds, and my daughter's at the center of it. But last year, all of a sudden I thought, everybody is moving on, like they are being promoted. They're so successful. But I realize I'm going to be around them for the next 50 years. So it's not that I'm right or wrong. So I would always say to my team, just because you read a book doesn't mean that what they're saying is right. The point is that it's a dialogue. So I always encourage people, the thing you control is reading. It's that piece. It's that reaching out and getting support to make sure that you're really seeing it correctly and that somebody can give you feedback that's real, so you can know how to position yourself to move forward. But what we did was I assigned a book, because I just said, are you coming to dinner? And they said yes. And I said, it's Trust and Inspire. It's Stephen Covey. And I'm pretty sure half of them didn't believe it was happening. And then they realized it was. And on New Year's Day, if you're in Waikiki Beach, you could see a whole pile of people reading books. And then if you went to Roy's for dinner, New Year's, everybody's celebrating. We have tons of wine. We're having fun. But we have a book club going on. So I think that it's because what I realized was that people can be successful. There's many different definitions. There's many different leadership styles as well. You need different leaders for different times. But the fundamentals, the core part of it, and I'm a Covey person, I'm a Max Dupree person. So I just thought, if they're going to be successful, I need to at least bring in this thought leadership so we can discuss it, so that later on down the road, somebody doesn't say to me, and they're super, super successful by whatever definition, I did it this way, and I do it by, like, it's that efficient leadership, not that effective leadership. We downsized, we're profitable. Our return was really great because we just laid off a whole pile of people, and it's okay. We help them. We have, I can't bear that conversation when I could have made a difference. So what that goes back to is I realize that some of them have really great leaders around them. Some of them don't. It doesn't really matter. What we need to do is to talk about all the good things, move them forward, and to share the hardships and the challenges like you might be feeling at work within the context of the book, so that we can stretch out stratum capability, because life is very long. And once again, I think that people want immediate gratification, immediate fix, immediate, and I get that. We live in a world that's like that. And if you were born in the age of Amazon, you're used to wanting something and you can get it the next day. If I wanted to eat
from the comfort of your own home.
Yeah, so I get that. It's nobody, it makes sense that life should work at that speed. But, if you're young and you've come into the workforce, you learn very quickly that, it doesn't quite work at the speed. And it can be very frustrating. So that's where the self-check is really important too. But it's also important to push out your timeline. So I would always say, to people coming into our career, they would say, well, I'm going to just try it for a year. And I would say, don't bother.
Totally,
right?
Yeah.
Don't bother, because if you can't push out your ability to see out at least 10 years, you're going to get tumbled by the waves and not come back up. But if you can push out your timeline to 10 years in anything you do, it doesn't mean you can't reserve the right to change your mind. Totally. You totally can. Yeah. But what that allows you to do is to recognize that, 3 bad years in 10, that's not bad at all. 3 bad months in 1 year, that is unbearable. So, I think, once again, anything that can extend your wisdom, your timeline, give you patience and give you knowledge and experience, so that you can, with good humor, good presence of mind, good self-awareness, look at your situation and feel in control and build that garden. So you might even be in a place where you are first growth. Really, it is a disaster around you.
For sure.
But there is beauty in that, and there's opportunity. So always look at the opportunity and be willing to lead that change and that opportunity.
Yeah, that's what I try to do anyway. So thank you for that. There was 2 that I took away for the younger people. One is to connect and build relationships with those that are perhaps further ahead than you. Oftentimes they'll say yes and provide you that time of day. 2 is to read. The more you learn, the more interesting you're going to be, and the more ability to be interested in those around you, because you'll be able to have pieces you can share or insights that will make the conversation more mutually beneficial. And you talked a lot about pressure and how change can create opportunity. Diamonds don't get created from just sitting there. They get created from immense amounts of pressure. And those that go through some of the hardest times, that have some of the craziest stories, generally become the most interesting people.
Yeah, and it's always the questions you ask. And unless you read, your questions can be very narrow, right? You don't have to have the experience. You can borrow the experience. But it's the quality of a conversation, your ability to connect, is in the quality of your questions and the sincerity in which you ask them, because you're genuinely curious. And the only way you can do that is just by stretching and realizing you're part of, there's connectiveness to us, and to reach out for that.
Totally. Well, we're coming close to the end here, Izumi, but there's a couple final questions I do want to touch on before we do. Before we dive into that, is there any pieces from your notes that you want to review that we haven't talked about that you want me to tie into these last couple of questions?
No. But I think the thing is just, once again, if anybody's listening and they want to chat further, I would love to hear you share your story so we can see what we can learn from each other. And that is, from my perspective, I don't know the difference between a mentor and a mentee. What I do know is that life is about meaningful relationships. So that's the vernacular that everybody understands when I say that. But I mean that sincerely, because I want to learn and grow. I've got 30 years ahead of me, at least. I know I can live 120 years in my bag of skin, and I'm sure they'll figure that out. And I'm okay being a brain in a box. it's that constant, how do I keep learning, how do I keep growing, how do I make a difference? Because there's a saying that, if your tomorrow is the same as today and you're okay with it because you do nothing different, why do you need tomorrow? And for anybody that looks forward to tomorrow, you have to give that really simple saying some thought, because we are here to make a difference. Otherwise, why would you be here?
Yeah, if you're not growing, you're shrinking. But I certainly know every conversation I have with you and interaction, I feel like I'm growing. So I do appreciate the time that you spend with me and those associated with our company. Now, you volunteer quite a lot as well, Izumi. So in addition to being a mentor, you volunteer with Kiwanis as well as with Abacus. Why would you say that industry volunteering as well as community volunteering are important?
Well, because it's contributing. It's giving back. I mean, I think that's a simple answer. And you really do want to be that change in the world you want to see. So it's easy to be a grumbly bumbly, and it still might not turn out the way that you like. But I think that if you exert some effort, at least you understand the why, and it helps you to navigate. And I think that's very important. You can't always get what you want, but you can understand how. Once again, if your want is 20 years out, for me, it was the profession. So, since the beginning of time, I never understood why being a financial advisor was not a profession like being a lawyer. And obviously, 35 years later, it's moved in a huge direction. But, the Professional Association, Advocates, there's many organizations out there, FPSC, they are all moving in that direction. And everybody is at the table. We're at a point of convergence from a regulatory, a legislative, and a technology perspective. And that moves the agenda forward even quicker. But once again, we're all in the same vision statement. How do we help people? How do we help people? I just coming here, there was some United Way. They did a research project on finances and stress, which I know FPSC has done that as well, that it said that 42% of people worry about money on the stress index. But this was interesting. It was fresh off the press from a different perspective, and it was that 55% of people, like, money is it creates so much worry, and 41% of what concerns them really creates health issues. And I apologize if I've got the 41 and 42 mixed, but it actually causes literally physical health issues. And 42% of people, they admit that they don't have more than a month that they could survive if they didn't have income. Those are such scary, scary stats. So what I do know is everybody that is my cohort, beyond what my organization was, beyond what my professional association was, beyond what, the MP, the MLA that we put in place, we all want to make the world a better place. And so you have to participate in the process. And my number one thing is, if you don't vote, which I'm not meaning to treat this like an Emmy Award and throw something at the end of my talk, but it is so important. I've seen people be indifferent, and the world's not perfect. It is perfectly imperfect so that you can make your mark. But when you have the privilege of, in a very simple way, of being part of that conversation, you need to participate. And if you don't like it, then volunteer and build something that you think that would be compelling to others, if your heart is good.
Certainly. Well, we need a lot more of that type of perspective among leaders, I would say. A lot of times, if you're not earning from it or it's not growing your career, some people think, well, why would I bother? Mm-hmm. But if it's the people who are not active in the industry leading, and it's perhaps people that don't have a view into what's actually happening, that can be a huge issue. Mm-hmm. Now, when you think about your own legacy, Izumi, so you still, as you said, probably have at least 30 years of impact left on this world, hopefully longer. What's the legacy that you would like to leave to for future generations in our industry and beyond?
I think it's just legacy is a big word, and I haven't earned it yet, and it might happen tomorrow. So just as a funny thing, I was thinking at my retirement party, people have to say nice things about you, and when you die, people have to say nice things about you. So I'm actually putting together a list. It's my little fun project right now of adjectives that people can't use. So they have to use behavioral examples that show that I led by example. So you can't say she had integrity or she cared. So that way, it forces me to really be impactful through my actions, because I know that it could actually be a very quiet funeral, which would be very depressing, and I don't want it to be depressing. But when we talk about legacy, that's what I think about. But legacy is also when you're living. Legacy is when you're working. That's the brand of who you are. It's a thing that people can consistently depend on, that leaves a mark, and it's a ripple point. So for me, I would like to believe that anybody that's come in contact with me knows that I really do cherish their uniqueness, and I'm always awed by potential. And so I would like to think that I have built relationships and taken the time to identify and to help people to find their space, to find their voice, and to do that for others, which many people have done before. It's not unique to me, but in my own way. People sometimes say, you're kind of crazy, I can't do that, that's not my potential. But I think it's to challenge people. And I think, a few minutes ago we were talking about potential and trust relationships. The reason why trust and relationships are important, it's because you can also have the difficult conversations. It's not for when things are going well. It's because you really care. You want to have influence and opportunity. People still choose, but to really be genuinely helpful and to genuinely care, to not be fair weather. And not to do what it takes to be fair weather, or to move like Teflon so quickly and not like Velcro, right? That it's like, oh, it's done and I've got a whole new thing that's happening, so it's not even relevant. Like, everything comes full circle. And so legacy is something that I watch all the time, and I know that I'm always perfectly imperfect, and I've said to everybody around me and to my team, they'll laugh if they're listening to this, or to my previous team, that I always say, we strive for perfectly imperfect, because then we cannot be replaced by AI. We're kind of that weird thing that they turn upside down going, I just don't understand this thing, we can't make it perfect. But it's more because we're all like that. So how do we find that unique piece that sticks to the Teflon, that I can connect in a meaningful way, and that we can have a relationship, and the joy that comes with it, and the celebration. I always keep a bottle of Moet because of Killer Queen, the song, but also because if you came to my house, I'm always looking for a reason to celebrate. But you can't do that unless you know what is important to people, or how significant things that might seem insignificant are in their path that is a long path. But if you can lock that hold in like rock climbing, that is the hold that will make maybe all the difference when they go through challenges. They can hold their vision straight, because what you're saying is, I'm cheering for you.
You put effort into every opportunity, and so thank you for the little relationship deposits that have grown into being the great deal of respect that I have for you. And I'm so appreciative of you coming down and sharing some time and some of your leadership lessons that we can share with the broader business community.
I think, like you said, just be kind, be curious, listen, and understand that what people think is really complex in that body of research, it's just about being a good human. And then if we put a business lens over it, obviously, when you have that opportunity to be a good human and you have influence and the opportunity to shape people, that comes with tremendous responsibility. And not everybody, it's to be a manager. I think there's books. You could even just follow the roles and responsibilities, and nobody would fault you. But to be a leader is everybody's responsibility. You become a leader, you know it when you're a parent. You're a leader when you do a volunteer thing. The ultimate way is to be the ultimate volunteer, and just be open-minded and always looking for ways to make a difference. And that requires that curiosity and that kindness.
Well, Izumi, thank you for being curious and kind and sharing your time with us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like or share it with someone who would benefit from the information. Izumi, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.